I was standing at the edge of my property line when I noticed the survey stakes that definitely were not there yesterday. My heart dropped into my stomach as I counted them. Bright orange plastic flags marking a path that cut right through the wetland area that was supposed to be protected forever under a conservation easement. My name is Oliver Fitzgerald, and I had moved to Asheville, North Carolina 3 years ago specifically because I found this perfect 10-acre property with a stream running through it and 3 acres of pristine wetlands that were protected under a perpetual conservation easement. The easement meant that portion of my land would never be developed, never be touched, preserved for wildlife and water quality in perpetuity. It was exactly what I wanted. I worked remotely as a software engineer, so I could live anywhere, and I chose here because of that guarantee of natural space. Now someone had apparently decided that guarantee meant nothing. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, documenting each stake, making sure to capture the GPS coordinates. The stakes formed a clear pattern, outlining what looked like a path or road that would cut directly through the protected wetland, connecting the main road to the back section of the neighborhood. My neighborhood, Riverside Heights, was governed by an HOA that I had minimal interaction with up until now. I paid my dues, kept my grass mowed to their ridiculous standards, and mostly they left me alone. That was apparently about to change. I was still photographing when I heard a voice behind me. "Good morning. I see you found the survey markers." I turned to find a woman in her late 40s, blonde hair styled in that particular way that screamed HOA president, wearing a pastel pink cardigan despite the warm May weather. She had a clipboard, because of course she did. "I am Sharon Mitchell, HOA president," she said, extending her hand with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I was actually planning to come talk to you today." I did not shake her hand. "Why are there survey stakes cutting through my conservation easement?" Her smile tightened. "Well, that is actually what I needed to discuss with you. The HOA board has been working on a wonderful improvement project. We are planning to add a secondary access road to improve emergency vehicle access to the back lots. The most efficient route happens to go through this section here. This section is under a conservation easement," I said slowly, as if explaining to a child. "It cannot be developed, ever." That is what a conservation easement means. Sharon's expression shifted to something resembling pity, which made my blood pressure spike. "I understand you might think that, but the HOA actually has certain rights that supersede individual property restrictions when it comes to community safety and access. We have had our lawyer review everything, and we are well within our rights." I stared at her in disbelief. "You think HOA bylaws override a legally recorded conservation easement? That is insane. This easement is registered with the county, it is monitored by the Asheville Land Conservancy, and it runs with the deed in perpetuity. You cannot just ignore it because you want a road." "Now, Oliver, there is no need to get hostile." Sharon's voice took on that condescending tone I would come to know very well. "The HOA serves the greater good of the community. Your property is part of this community, which means certain accommodations must be made. We have already approved the project with a majority vote from the board. I do not care if you had a unanimous vote from everyone in the neighborhood," I said, my voice rising. "You cannot build on land protected by a conservation easement, period." Sharon sighed dramatically. "I was hoping you would be reasonable about this. The easement was filed 15 years ago by the previous owner. Property rights evolve. The HOA has a responsibility to all residents, not just one person's outdated environmental concerns. Outdated environmental concerns. That easement protects the stream that feeds into the French Broad River. It protects wetlands that prevent flooding and filter runoff. It is not some decorative feature that you can pave over because it is inconvenient. The board has already hired contractors, Sharon said, her pleasant mask slipping to reveal irritation underneath. Work is scheduled to begin in 2 weeks. I strongly suggest you cooperate. Fighting this will only create unnecessary tension with your neighbors, and trust me, you do not want to be on the HOA's bad side. The implied threat hung in the air between us. Get off my property, I said quietly. Sharon's eyes narrowed. Excuse me. You heard me. Get off my property. And tell your contractors that anyone who sets foot on the conservation easement area will be charged with trespassing. The HOA has legal access rights to. No, you do not. Not to this land. Get out, Sharon. She turned on her heel, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. You are making a big mistake, Oliver. The HOA has resources and community support. You are just one person. I watched her stalk back toward the main road, then immediately called the Asheville Land Conservancy. It was Saturday, so I left a detailed voicemail explaining the situation and sent a follow-up email with all the photos I had taken. Then I called my real estate attorney, James Chen, who had handled my property purchase. James answered on the third ring, sounding relaxed. Oliver, hey. How is the property? Under attack. I need your help. The relaxed tone vanished. What happened? I explained the situation, the survey stakes, Sharon's claims that HOA rights superseded the conservation easement. I could hear James typing as I talked. Okay, first thing, they are completely wrong, James said. A conservation easement is not some casual agreement. It is a legal restriction on the deed recorded with the county register. The HOA bylaws do not and cannot override it. Second, who holds the easement? The Asheville Land Conservancy. Good, they are solid. They will have an interest in enforcing this. You have already contacted them, left a message and sent an email with photos. Perfect. I am going to pull the HOA's founding documents and bylaws, your deed, and the easement filing. Can you come to my office Monday morning? Say 9. I will be there. In the meantime, do not engage with the HOA board. Do not get into arguments. Document everything. If they try to contact you, keep it brief and do not agree to anything. I spent the rest of the weekend anxiously monitoring my property. I set up a trail camera pointing at the survey stakes and checked it obsessively. On Sunday afternoon, I got a call from Rachel Torres, the executive director of the Asheville Land Conservancy. Oliver, I got your message and photos. I have to say, I am both alarmed and not surprised. Not surprised. We have had issues with this particular HOA before, Rachel explained. About 5 years ago, they tried to pressure another landowner with a conservation easement to allow a community garden on protected land. We had to send a cease and desist. The board president back then eventually backed down, but it sounds like your current president is more aggressive. Sharon Mitchell. Yes, Sharon. She has only been president for about a year. She is very focused on what she calls community improvements, which often means she has no respect for legal boundaries. Literally, in this case. Rachel explained that the Conservancy would send an official letter to the HOA on Monday, reminding them that the conservation easement was a legal encumbrance on the property that no HOA had the authority to violate. She would also reach out to the county to ensure no permits had been improperly issued. What happens if they ignore the letter? I asked. Then we file an injunction. We do not take easement violations lightly, Oliver. These protections exist for important environmental reasons, and we have a legal obligation to enforce them. If necessary, we will take this to court. Monday morning arrived with an email from Sharon to my inbox. The subject line was Riverside Heights Community Access Project Mandatory Landowner Meeting. The email informed me that there would be a special HOA meeting on Wednesday evening to discuss the access road project and address concerns from affected property owners. It was phrased as an invitation, but the word mandatory in the subject line told a different story. The email also mentioned that failure to attend could result in penalties as outlined in the HOA bylaws, Section 7, subsection C. I forwarded it to James before heading to his office. James's office was in downtown Asheville, in one of the renovated brick buildings near Pack Square. He had coffee ready and a stack of documents spread across his conference table. "Okay, let me show you what we are dealing with," James said, putting on his reading glasses. "First, your conservation easement. Filed in 2010, held by the Asheville Land Conservancy, explicitly prohibits any development, construction, or alteration of the 3-acre wetland area described in the legal description. It is rock solid." He pulled out another document. "Here are the Riverside Heights HOA bylaws. They have standard provisions about community property, shared expenses, architectural review, all normal stuff. There is a section about access for maintenance and emergency purposes to individual properties, but nothing, absolutely nothing, that would give them the right to build a road through protected wetland. Sharon said their lawyer reviewed everything and they have the right to do this." James snorted. "Then their lawyer is either incompetent or did not actually review anything, unless—" He paused, flipping through more papers. "Unless they are relying on a really twisted interpretation of this clause here, Section 12 about condemnation and public necessity." Condemnation. It is a provision that basically says if the government needs to take HOA property for public use, the HOA will cooperate. Some HOAs have tried to argue they can invoke similar powers for community necessity, but it is legally dubious at best, and it definitely does not override a conservation easement. Plus, this is not even HOA property. It is your property with an easement on it. He pulled out his laptop and showed me the email from Rachel at the Conservancy. They sent their letter this morning, very strongly worded. Basically says the HOA needs to cease all activity related to the proposed road through the easement area immediately, or they will seek injunctive relief. "What about this mandatory meeting Wednesday? You are not required to go, but I think you should. I will come with you. I want to see what they are planning to argue, and I want them to know you have legal representation. These things work better when we can shut down bad ideas before they turn into expensive lawsuits." Wednesday evening, James and I arrived at the Riverside Heights Community Clubhouse at 6:30. The meeting was scheduled for 7, but the parking lot was already filling up. I recognized several of my neighbors, though I did not know most of them well. Riverside Heights had about 60 homes, and I tended to keep to myself. Sharon was at the front of the room, arranging papers on a podium. She looked up when we entered, and her expression soured when she saw James. "Oliver, I am glad you came," she said, her voice sugary. "Though this is a community meeting, I am not sure outsiders are appropriate." "James Chen, Mr. Fitzgerald's attorney," James said smoothly, extending his business card. "I am here to observe and advise my client regarding any discussions that affect his property rights." Sharon took the card with obvious distaste. "I do not think legal representation is necessary for a simple community discussion." "We will stay anyway," I said, moving to find seats in the middle of the room. The meeting started promptly at 7. Besides Sharon, there were 4 other board members. A man named Greg Paulson, who served as treasurer, a woman named Linda Harper as secretary, and 2 at-large members, Tom Kennedy and Patricia Zimmer. They sat at a table facing the rows of chairs where residents gathered. Sharon called the meeting to order and launched into her presentation. She had a PowerPoint, which would have been impressive if the content was not completely wrong. As many of you know, the board has been working diligently to improve safety and access throughout our community, Sharon began, clicking to a slide showing a map of the neighborhood. One significant concern that has been raised repeatedly is the limited access to homes in the southern section. If there were an emergency, fire trucks or ambulances currently have to use the single entrance and navigate several narrow turns. Response times could be critical. She clicked to another slide showing the proposed road, a cheerful red line cutting through my property. The solution we have developed is a secondary access road here, which would provide a direct route from Highway 25 to the southern lots. This would improve emergency response times and also help with traffic flow during peak hours. Several residents nodded. I could see the appeal if you did not know the full situation. Now, the most direct route for this road does cross a portion of Oliver Fitzgerald's property, Sharon continued, gesturing vaguely in my direction. Mr. Fitzgerald has expressed some concerns about this, which is understandable. However, the board has thoroughly researched the legal issues, and we are confident that community safety needs and HOA access rights allow for this project to move forward. I stood up. That is not accurate. Sharon's smile was tight. Oliver, there will be time for questions and comments after the presentation. No, I think the community deserves to know the facts now, I said. The area where you want to build your road is under a permanent conservation easement. That means it is legally protected and cannot be developed. Period. This is not a matter of HOA access rights or community needs. It is illegal. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sharon's face flushed. The board has consulted with legal counsel, she started. Then your legal counsel is wrong, James said, standing up beside me. I am Oliver's attorney, and I have reviewed the conservation easement, the HOA bylaws, and all relevant property documents. There is no legal basis for this road. The Asheville Land Conservancy, which holds the easement, has already sent you a cease and desist letter. If you proceed with this project, you will be in violation of legally binding conservation restrictions, and you will face immediate legal action. The murmurs got louder. Greg, the treasurer, leaned over to whisper something to Sharon. This is exactly the kind of obstructionist attitude that prevents our community from moving forward, Sharon said, her voice rising. We have families with children here. We have elderly residents. Their safety should not be less important than some birds and frogs. It is not about birds and frogs, I said, trying to keep my voice level. It is about the law. Conservation easements protect water quality, prevent flooding, and preserve ecosystems. But even if you do not care about any of that, you cannot just ignore legal restrictions on private property because you want to build something. The easement is 15 years old, Sharon shot back. Filed by a previous owner with different priorities. Circumstances change. Needs change. The HOA represents the current needs of the community. The easement is perpetual, James interjected. That means it never expires. It was part of the deed when Oliver bought the property, and it will be part of the deed forever. No HOA, no board, no vote can change that. Patricia, one of the at-large board members, spoke up. Sharon, I thought you said the lawyers told us we could do this. Sharon shot her a look. The legal situation is complex. It is not complex, James said. You cannot build on land with a conservation easement. That is very simple. Tom, the other at-large member, looked increasingly uncomfortable. Maybe we should table this until we get clearer legal advice. We have clear legal advice, Sharon insisted, from Richard Bowman, who has been an HOA attorney for 20 years. He assured the board that community safety needs provide a legal basis for necessary access improvements. I looked at James, who pulled out his phone. He typed quickly, then showed me the screen. Richard Bowman was indeed an HOA attorney, but his website and reviews suggested he specialized in covenant enforcement and fee collection, not property law or environmental regulations. Did Mr. Bowman actually review the conservation easement documents? James asked. Sharon hesitated just a fraction too long. He was provided with all relevant information. That is not what I asked. Did he review the actual recorded conservation easement? The board provided him with the HOA bylaws and CC and Articus. So no, James said. He did not review the easement, which means his advice is based on incomplete information and is therefore worthless. Miss Mitchell, I strongly advise you and this board to halt all activity related to this project immediately. If you do not, you will be exposing the HOA and possibly yourselves personally to significant legal liability. The room erupted in overlapping conversations. Several residents were clearly concerned about the legal issues James raised. Others seemed angry at me for blocking what they saw as a safety improvement. Sharon was trying to regain control of the meeting, but it was chaos. Finally, Linda, the secretary, stood up. I move that we table the Access Road project pending a comprehensive legal review by an attorney specializing in property and environmental law. Second, Tom said immediately. Sharon looked furious. That is not necessary. We have already all in favor, Linda said, raising her hand. Tom and Patricia raised their hands. Greg looked at Sharon, then reluctantly raised his hand as well. Motion carries, Linda announced. The project is tabled. Sharon gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements. This meeting is adjourned. As people filed out, several neighbors approached me. Some thanked me for standing up to the board. Others glared at me like I had personally endangered their families. One elderly man, who introduced himself as Walter, told me he lived on one of the southern lots and had been advocating for better access for years. I understand your frustration, I told him honestly, but there are other routes that do not go through protected wetlands. The HOA should explore those options. Sharon said this was the only feasible route, Walter said, looking troubled. Sharon is not a civil engineer or a land surveyor, James pointed out. There are always options. They might be more expensive or require more planning, but that does not make them impossible. Over the next few days, I thought things had settled down. The survey stakes remained, but no workers appeared. I checked my trail camera daily. The Conservancy confirmed they had received no response to their letter, which Rachel said was typical of people hoping an issue would just go away. Then on Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery. I threw on clothes and ran outside to find a small excavator and a truck with Henderson Land Clearing painted on the side parked at the edge of my property. Two men in work clothes were walking the stake line, and the excavator was positioning itself to start work. Stop! I shouted, running toward them. You cannot be here, one of the men, a stocky guy in his 50s with a Henderson Land Clearing hat, turned to face me. You the property owner? Yes, and this is private property with a conservation easement. You do not have permission to be here. The man pulled out a work order. We got a contract from the Riverside Heights HOA, clearing and grading for a new access road. They said they had all the necessary permissions. They lied to you, I said bluntly. This land is under a permanent conservation easement. No development is allowed. If you start work, You will be violating federal and state environmental laws, and I will have you arrested for trespassing and criminal damage to protected wetlands." The man's partner, younger and looking nervous, said, "Dale, maybe we should call the office." Dale studied me, then looked at the work order again. The HOA lady said the owner might cause problems, but that they had legal authority. "I have an attorney and the Land Conservancy who holds the easement on speed dial," I said, pulling out my phone. "You can start work and deal with the lawsuits and criminal charges, or you can leave now and take it up with whoever hired you." Dale was clearly doing math in his head about liability and hassle. "Let me call our office." He walked back to his truck while his partner stayed with the excavator. I called James, who answered immediately despite it being 7 in the morning on a Saturday. "They sent contractors," I said without preamble. "Are they working?" "Not yet. The owner is calling his office. But James, the HOA, lied to them, told them they had all permissions. That could constitute fraud. Stay on the line. I am calling the Conservancy emergency number." For 10 tense minutes, I watched Dale talk on his phone, his expression growing increasingly unhappy. His partner had turned off the excavator and was sitting on the truck bumper, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Finally, Dale walked back over. "Our office is pulling us off this job pending legal review." The HOA lady apparently did not disclose the conservation easement when she contracted us. "That is a big problem." "For her, not for you," I agreed. "Yeah, well, we do not need that kind of headache. Sorry for the trouble." I watched them load the excavator back onto its trailer and drive away, relief flooding through me. Then, anger replaced it. Sharon had not just ignored the legal issues. She had actively tried to circumvent them, lying to contractors to get work started, probably hoping that once the damage was done, it would be too late to stop the project. James called back. "Contractors gone." "Yes, they left once they realized the situation." "Good." "Rachel from the Conservancy is filing for an emergency injunction this morning. We are also going to demand that the HOA board meet with us immediately to resolve this." What Sharon did this morning crosses a line from ignorance into potential fraud and intentional interference with conservation protections. The injunction was granted by Monday afternoon. A judge issued a temporary restraining order prohibiting the HOA, its agents, contractors, or representatives from entering or conducting any work on the conservation easement area. Violations could result in contempt charges. James and Rachel met with the HOA board on Tuesday evening. Sharon insisted that I not attend, which James said was fine since I was represented by counsel. He texted me updates throughout the meeting. James, Sharon still insisting HOA has authority, brought their attorney Bowman. He clearly never reviewed the easement docs. James, Rachel just destroyed Bowman's argument in about 90 seconds. He is frantically reading the easement now. James, Bowman just advised the board that they have no legal basis for the road project. Sharon looks like she wants to explode. James, board voting to officially cancel the project. Sharon voting no. Everyone else voting yes. James, meeting over. Project canceled. Sharon stormed out. I allowed myself to believe it was over. The project was canceled, the injunction was in place, and surely even Sharon would not be reckless enough to continue. I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter from the HOA. It was a notice of violation and fine. According to the letter, I had violated Section 15 of the HOA bylaws regarding obstructionist behavior detrimental to community interests, and was being fined $5,000, with additional daily fines of $500 until I ceased obstruction of approved community projects. I called James immediately. They cannot be serious, I said, reading him the letter. James was quiet for a moment. This is retaliation, pure and simple. There is no such thing as a violation for exercising your legal property rights. This is Sharon lashing out because she lost. What do I do? Do not pay the fine. Save all documentation. We are going to respond very aggressively to this. The HOA is now officially harassing you, and that opens them up to serious liability. James drafted a response that made my blood pressure drop just reading it. It laid out in precise legal language how the HOA was attempting to illegally penalize me for defending legally protected property rights, how this constituted harassment and retaliation, and how the HOA board members could be held personally liable if they continued. The letter concluded by demanding immediate withdrawal of all fines and a written apology, failing which we would pursue legal action for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of my property rights. Sharon's response came via email 3 days later. She claimed the fines were valid under the bylaws, and that I had created significant financial harm to the HOA by blocking the road project. She also said that if I continued to attack the board, they would be forced to place a lien on my property for unpaid fines. That was a mistake. James filed suit in Buncombe County Superior Court the next day. We sued the HOA as an entity and Sharon Mitchell personally for harassment, abuse of authority, and attempted violation of conservation easement protections. We also filed a motion for sanctions and attorney's fees. The lawsuit got the attention of the local media. A reporter from the Asheville Citizen-Times called me for comment, and I gave her the full story. The article ran on the front page of the local section. HOA president sued over conservation easement dispute. The article laid out the facts clearly, including Sharon's attempts to fine me for defending protected wetlands. It quoted Rachel from the Conservancy talking about the importance of conservation easements. It mentioned that Sharon had hired contractors without disclosing the easement restrictions. The community response was swift. I started getting supportive messages from neighbors I had never met. A local environmental group issued a statement supporting my position. Most significantly, several other Riverside Heights residents filed complaints with the HOA board about Sharon's conduct. An emergency board meeting was called. This time, I was invited to attend. The meeting took place on a Thursday evening and the clubhouse was packed. James and Rachel both came with me. The 4 other board members sat at the table, but Sharon's chair was empty. Linda, the secretary, called the meeting to order. She looked exhausted. Before we begin, I need to inform everyone that Sharon Mitchell has resigned as HOA president, effective immediately, Linda announced. She submitted her resignation this afternoon. There was a collective murmur of surprise. Linda continued, "The board has reviewed the lawsuit filed by Oliver Fitzgerald and has concluded that Miss Mitchell acted beyond her authority and contrary to legal advice in pursuing the access road project. The board has voted unanimously to settle Mr. Fitzgerald's lawsuit." Greg, the treasurer, spoke next. "The settlement terms include withdrawal of all fines levied against Mr. Fitzgerald, payment of his reasonable attorney's fees, a formal written apology from the board, and a commitment that the HOA will not pursue any development projects affecting the conservation easement area in the future." Tom, the at-large member, added, "We also want to apologize directly to Oliver. Sharon convinced the board that she had proper legal advice and authority for this project. We should have been more diligent in verifying that before proceeding. This situation never should have happened." I looked at James, who nodded slightly. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully. and I am willing to settle on those terms, but I want to make sure the board understands the seriousness of what happened. Conservation easements exist for critical environmental reasons. They are not suggestions or obstacles to work around. They are permanent legal protections, and they need to be respected. Understood, Linda said. We are also implementing new procedures, requiring independent legal review of any major projects before board approval, specifically to prevent this kind of situation. The settlement was finalized 2 weeks later. The HOA paid my attorney's fees, which had climbed to nearly $15,000. They issued a written apology acknowledging that their actions were inappropriate and legally unfounded. All fines were withdrawn and expunged from my account. More importantly, the HOA worked with the Conservancy to put up educational signs near the conservation easement area, explaining what it protected and why. They also established a formal policy recognizing conservation easements within the community and prohibiting any HOA activities that would interfere with them. But the story was not quite over yet. About a month after the settlement, I was working in my home office when I saw a car pull into my driveway. I did not recognize the vehicle, a newer Lexus SUV. A woman got out, and it took me a moment to realize it was Sharon. I went to the door but did not open it. "What do you want, Sharon?" Through the glass, she looked different, smaller somehow. Her hair was not as styled, and she was not wearing the pastel cardigans and pearls. "I wanted to apologize," she said. "Really apologize, not the corporate lawyer version." I hesitated, then opened the door but did not invite her in. "I acted terribly," Sharon continued. "I got so focused on this project, on proving I could get things done as president, that I stopped listening to anyone who told me I was wrong. I convinced myself that you were being difficult, that the easement was some technicality I could work around. I was wrong about all of it. You tried to destroy protected wetlands and then retaliated against me for stopping you," I said flatly. "I know, and I am ashamed. I lost my position, and honestly, I deserve to lose it. Several neighbors are not speaking to me. My husband is furious about the legal costs and the embarrassment, but mostly, I feel terrible about what I tried to do to your property and to those wetlands." She pulled an envelope from her purse. "This is my personal apology in writing. I wanted you to have it." I took the envelope but did not open it. "I do not expect forgiveness," Sharon said. "I just wanted you to know that I understand now how wrong I was." The Conservancy director, Rachel, actually sat down with me and explained the whole ecosystem and why these protections matter. I should have listened to that from the beginning instead of fighting everyone. "Yeah, you should have," Sharon nodded, looking down at her feet. "Anyway, I will leave you alone. I am actually moving. My husband got a job opportunity in Charlotte, and honestly, I think we both need a fresh start somewhere I have not made myself the neighborhood villain." After she left, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, 3 pages long, detailing her apology and acknowledging each specific thing she had done wrong. It was thorough and seemed genuine. I called Rachel at the Conservancy to tell her about Sharon's visit. "She did contact me," Rachel confirmed. "Asked a lot of questions about conservation work and easements. She seemed genuinely interested in understanding what she had almost destroyed. People make mistakes, Oliver. Some of them learn from those mistakes." "I guess that is something," I said. Summer arrived, and life in Riverside Heights settled into a peaceful routine. The new HOA president, Tom Kennedy, was low-key and reasonable. The board approved a proposal to work with the county on alternative access improvements that did not involve my property or any easements. I started volunteering with the Conservancy, helping with monitoring visits to other protected properties. seeing the network of preserved lands across western North Carolina, understanding how each piece connected to create wildlife corridors and protect water quality, reinforced why the fight had been worth it. In August, the Conservancy held a small ceremony at my property. They installed a permanent marker near the wetland area, explaining the conservation easement and what it protected. Local officials attended, along with neighbors and environmental groups. Even a few of the residents who had initially supported the road project came, including Walter from the southern lots. Walter approached me after the ceremony. "I wanted to say I am sorry for being upset with you initially," he said. Tom explained that there are other options being explored for better access. Sometimes the right way is not the fastest way. "I appreciate that, Walter, and I really do understand the access concerns. I hope the alternative solutions work out." That evening, I walked down to the stream that ran through the conservation area. The water was clear, flowing over smooth rocks. A great blue heron stood in the shallows, hunting for fish. Frogs sang from the wetland. Lightning bugs were just starting to emerge as twilight fell. This was what I had moved here for. This was what conservation easements protected. Not just abstract environmental concepts, but real, living ecosystems that would persist long after I was gone. My phone buzzed with a text from James. "Saw the news coverage of the ceremony. Congratulations on the win that actually mattered." I smiled and typed back, "Thanks for everything. Could not have done it without you." Another text came through, this one from Rachel. "Next week we are visiting a property in Madison County with a possible easement violation. Want to come along? Could use someone with recent experience dealing with unreasonable people." I laughed and replied that I would be there. The Riverside Heights Access Road project eventually moved forward the following spring, taking a route along the northern boundary that connected to the main road without affecting any protected areas. It cost more and required additional engineering, but it provided the emergency access the southern residents needed without destroying wetlands. Tom told me the project actually turned out better than the original plan because the new route had better sight lines and required less grading. "Sometimes when you cannot do things the easy wrong way, you end up finding a better right way," he said. I framed Sharon's apology letter and hung it in my office, not as a trophy but as a reminder. A reminder that people can change, that environmental protections require constant vigilance, and that standing up for what is right is not always easy, but is always necessary. The conservation easement marker stood solid near the wetland, a permanent testament to the idea that some places should remain wild, that some protections should be unbreakable, and that sometimes one person defending what matters can make all the difference. 2 years later, I got an unexpected email. It was from Sharon. She and her husband had settled in Charlotte, and she had started volunteering with the Catawba Riverkeeper Foundation, working on water quality issues. The email was brief but warm, thanking me again and letting me know that our conflict had actually changed the direction of her life in a positive way. I replied with encouragement, genuinely happy that something good had come from such a difficult situation. The Riverside Heights HOA never caused another problem with the conservation easement. They actually became supporters of conservation efforts in the area, partnering with the Conservancy on educational programs for residents. As for me, I continued my work with the Conservancy, helping other landowners understand and protect their easements. I also started writing about conservation law and property rights, sharing what I had learned with a broader audience. Several other communities reached out after reading about the Riverside Heights situation, wanting to understand how to better respect conservation protections in their own neighborhoods. James and I stayed in touch, and he referred several other clients to me who were facing similar HOA overreach issues. Apparently, my case had become somewhat famous in property law circles as an example of successful easement defense. But the best outcome was simply being able to sit on my back porch on summer evenings, listening to the stream and the wildlife, knowing that this place would remain protected. The wetlands continued to filter water, provide habitat, and prevent flooding. The ecosystem thrived. I thought often about how close it had come to being destroyed. If I had not noticed those survey stakes, if I had not immediately contacted the Conservancy and James, if I had backed down when Sharon tried to intimidate me with fines and threats, the wetlands would be under asphalt now. The stream would be channeled into culverts. The wildlife would have lost critical habitat. One person standing firm had made the difference. That realization carried weight and responsibility. It meant that every protected place depended on someone caring enough to defend it. Every conservation easement needed a guardian willing to say no when powerful interests wanted to ignore legal protections for convenience or profit. I took that responsibility seriously. When other landowners called, worried about threats to their own easements, I shared everything I had learned. I walked them through the legal process, connected them with resources, and reminded them that they were not alone. The conservation community was small but dedicated, and we looked out for each other. On the third anniversary of the survey stakes incident, the Conservancy held their annual celebration at various protected properties throughout the region. My property was selected as one of the featured sites. Over 100 people came, walking the trails I had developed through the upland areas, learning about the wetland ecosystem, and seeing firsthand what conservation easements protected. Children played near the stream, catching tadpoles and examining water insects. Their parents asked questions about native plants and wildlife. Elderly couples walked slowly through the woods, appreciating the peace and natural beauty. This was the real victory. Not winning against the HOA, though that mattered. Not getting an apology from Sharon, though that provided closure. The real victory was this living, thriving ecosystem that would continue long after everyone here today was gone. As the sun set and guests began to leave, Rachel pulled me aside. "You know, when you first called about those survey stakes, I thought this would be another long, messy fight that we would probably win, but that would take years and cost everyone a fortune." "It almost was," I said, "but it was not. Because you acted immediately, because you had good legal help, and because you did not back down even when Sharon tried to intimidate you. You turned what could have been a nightmare into a teaching moment for the whole community." "Sharon deserves some credit too," I said. "She could have kept fighting, made it personal, dragged it out. Instead, she resigned and actually learned from the experience." Rachel nodded. "That is rare. Most people in her position double down. The fact that she was willing to admit she was wrong and change says something." We stood watching the last light fade over the wetland. A barred owl called from the woods, that distinctive "who cooks for you" sound. "What is next for you?" Rachel asked. "Keep working with the Conservancy. Keep writing about conservation issues. Maybe eventually work on policy, try to strengthen protections so the next person facing this does not have to fight as hard." "We could use your voice in that arena," Rachel said, "and your experience." Not many people have successfully defended against this kind of aggressive HOA overreach and lived to tell about it. I laughed. "When you put it that way, it sounds more dramatic than it was." "Oh, it was dramatic. Lawsuits, injunctions, media coverage, neighborhood drama. That is pretty much peak excitement for property law. Over the following months, I did get more involved in conservation policy. I testified at county commission meetings about the importance of respecting conservation easements. I wrote op-eds for regional papers. I even spoke at a National Land Trust conference about defending easements against HOA interference. The story resonated because it was not really about me or even about my specific property. It was about the broader tension between individual development interests and collective environmental protection. It was about how legal protections mean nothing if people are not willing to enforce them. It was about the courage required to stand alone against community pressure when you know you are right. Other cases emerged where HOA boards tried similar schemes, and each time, the landowners reached out to me for advice. I connected them with conservation organizations and attorneys. I shared the legal documents from my case. I offered moral support when they were being harassed or fined for defending their rights. Most of these cases settled quickly once the HOA realized they were dealing with informed, prepared landowners who would not be pushed around. A few went to litigation, and in every single case, the conservation easement won. That track record mattered. It established precedent and sent a clear message to overly aggressive HOA boards that conservation easements were not loopholes to exploit, but solid legal protections that courts would enforce. James told me that he now included information about conservation easement rights in his standard presentation to HOA boards when they hired him for legal advice. After what happened with Riverside Heights, I make sure every board I work with understands they cannot just ignore easements, he said. Your case became the cautionary tale I used to keep other HOAs from making the same mistake. I took some satisfaction in that. Sharon's misguided crusade had inadvertently created a teaching tool that protected other conservation lands. Years passed. The wetland on my property remained pristine. The HOA focused on reasonable community improvements that did not threaten protected areas. New residents moved in, many specifically attracted to the neighborhood because of its conservation values and natural beauty. I eventually served a term on the HOA board myself, bringing my perspective on environmental stewardship and legal boundaries. It was not something I particularly wanted to do, but Tom convinced me that having someone with my experience on the board would help ensure nothing like the access road debacle ever happened again. During my time on the board, we actually expanded conservation efforts in the neighborhood. We worked with the Conservancy to identify other properties where easements might make sense. We developed community guidelines for native landscaping and wildlife-friendly practices. We organized volunteer days for invasive species removal and stream cleanup. Riverside Heights transformed from a standard suburban development into a model for conservation-minded community living. Media coverage of that transformation always traced back to the original conflict, the moment when the community had to choose between convenience and conservation, and ultimately chose the latter. Walter, the elderly resident from the southern lots, became one of the strongest advocates for conservation efforts. He told me once that initially feeling inconvenienced by the road dispute had actually opened his eyes to environmental issues he had never considered before. Now he was the one speaking at board meetings about protecting natural areas and wildlife corridors. That kind of transformation gave me hope. Change was possible. People could learn and grow. Communities could choose a better path. My conservation easement remained a cornerstone of that better path, a permanent reminder that some values transcend convenience. Some protections are non-negotiable, and some places deserve to remain wild forever. Standing at the edge of the wetland on a cool October morning, watching mist rise from the water as Canada geese flew overhead in perfect formation. I felt the weight and reward of that fight from years ago. The survey stakes were long gone, replaced by native plants and thriving wildlife. The threat had been turned back. The land was safe, and that made everything worth it.